Hi, I'm Stumpy Nubs, and this is the butter churn table. I was doing some browsing on the internet, and I came across an antique butter churn that had been converted into a side table. They took out the paddles inside, or whatever was in there, and they left the crank on. I thought it was a great idea, but I didn't have an antique butter churn, so I decided to build one that looks like an antique. We built this project mostly in our homemade workshop, where almost all of the tools and machines are homemade. You can get plans to build many of these machines yourself on our website at stumpynubs.com. I started my butter churn table with some inexpensive pine from a home center. I didn't mind a few knots because the original had them too. In fact, the original might have been homemade, though at least the crank was manufactured. They may have had 18-inch wide boards way back then, but I had to edge glue a few narrow ones to make mine up. The overall size of this thing is 21 inches wide, 16 inches deep, and 24 inches tall. That's loosely based on the original. If you need more details, I'll try and get a set of plans together and put them up on our website soon. The side panels had to be relieved of their bottom corners. I measured 3 3/4 of an inch from the sides and 6 inches up from the bottom. Then I connected those 2 points. You can cut along these lines with a bandsaw or with my homemade jigsaw if you happen to have built one of those. We'll need to transfer those angles to the table saw so we can cut the bevels on the lower side panels. I just held one of the upper side panels in place and then used a bevel gauge to get the angle, which I then used to set the blade on my table saw. After the lower side panels were beveled on one edge, I returned to my bench and marked the width I needed to rip those panels down to. I'm using glue and a couple of brad nails just to hold things together temporarily, but since I want this project to look old, I'm using some authentic 1870s cut nails to really secure all the joints. You can buy antique nails on the internet, and there are a few companies still making them today. I absolutely love these things because they look great on all sorts of projects and they hold far better than any modern nail. They don't even split this soft pine as long as you position them with the grain. If you'd like to learn more about cut nails, check out the video we made about them in the March 2016 issue of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal, which you can read for free in our archives at stumpynubs.com. The way I beveled the lower side panels is a bit different from the way the original was built. I just didn't like the way that they overlapped the panels above them on the original. They likely built it that way because it was less prone to leakage, but since we're not really going to be filling this thing full of cream, I went with a cleaner looking joint. I did, however, leave the edges of the bottom panel square. I think that's a nice compromise. A little work with a block plane eases the transition on the sides, and the shavings make me feel like a real old-timey woodworker, even if I did do a lot of this work on the table saw. I cut both parts of the top panel from the same board so the grain matched. I don't know if that was necessary, but I like it that way. I'm using some old strap hinges I found at an antique shop. Shiny new hinges would have looked ridiculous in my opinion. Of course, you can use whatever you have handy, and there are some ways to make new hardware look old if you do a Google search on it. The other piece of hardware I needed was a crank. Now, I could have made the crank out of wood, and I'm sure some butter churns had wooden cranks, but I found an old meat grinder in an antique shop that had a perfect crank handle on it. For some reason, they never nickel-plated the handles on these things, so while the bodies stayed shiny, the handles and other parts developed a nice patina. That's perfect for our uses. All I had to do was choose a place on the side of my churn to bore a hole. I used a 3/8 inch bolt and the big wing nut from the other end of the grinder to hold my handle in place. You can find old meat grinders at yard sales and flea markets and antique shops, but if you don't have one, it wouldn't be a problem to just make something up out of wood. I don't know what the leg splay was on the original, so I put a couple of 24-inch long boards on the side of my churn and eyeballed it until I thought it looked right. I then transferred the angle I needed to cut the ends straight across over to my miter fence on my saw's homemade sliding table, where I cut both ends of each leg. Then I located the center point of my side panels on the churn, and I struck a line about 3 inches below and parallel to the top. I used these marks to mount the legs, being careful to keep the mitered ends of my legs on that line. I used glue and nails to secure them in place. When I repeated the process on the other side, I also measured between the feet to make sure the distance between them was equal on both sets of legs. You may have to set the whole thing on a flat surface to check for wobble, trimming a bit off one leg as needed. And this is the completed project. It's a new butter churn that looks old, not just because of the way we built it, but also because I spent some time distressing it a bit and applying a special finish that gave the pine a nice aged look. It's a really neat process, and if you'd like to learn more about how to make a new piece of furniture look old, you'll find a free video walking you through the process in the March 2016 issue of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal, which again you can access for free at stumpynubs.com. I hope you enjoyed this project. Now go build one yourself. See you next time.